Welcome back to Arc Salt Lake on your Thursday morning. It is now 7:31. The latest inflation numbers are out, and there's some good news and some bad news. Prices slightly dropped from last year, but the real concern is that wages failed to keep pace with inflation, and hourly wages actually decreased. Joining us now to explain what it all means is Zions Bank senior economist Robert Spendlove. Robert, thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you.
All right. Well, I always enjoy talking to you. You always give us some great analysis here. So give us the basics here. What led to inflation dropping from last year by a pretty small amount?
Yeah, so what we're looking at, we've got a number of different reports on inflation, on price changes. And this is, the big one. We call this the Consumer Price Index. So the Department of Labor, the Labor Department goes out and literally has people go out and buy a basket of goods. So they go out to the grocery store and they'll buy pretty much, everything there, right? Eggs and bacon and laundry soap and everything you can think of. And then they also go out and survey what different services cost, healthcare, accounting services, legal services. They put all of this together, this basket of goods, and then compare those prices from 1 month to the next and from 1 year to the next. And so, and it becomes one of the major indicators of how the economy is doing. And so what we saw with the Consumer Price Index that came out yesterday was that inflation slowed just a little bit. So it had been 3.5%. It slowed down to 3.4%. And then another one of the measures they do is they strip out food and fuel because they're so volatile. We call that core inflation. And core inflation also slowed just slightly down to 2.5% from 2.6% the month before. So what we saw is prices slowing, but just very slightly slowing from where they were previously.
I want to have you go over this. We've talked about it before when you've been in studio with us. Talk about, you're keeping track of kind of two things here, year over year, but also from month to month, correct?
Yeah, and so the reason you're looking at both of those is the year over year is a little bit easier to understand, but you can have problems of, we call it the base effect, where your numbers can look extra high or extra low just because of what we've seen a year ago. And so then we'll also look at the month over month changes. Those are really good because they can give you an indication of what's happening right now, but they can be a little bit more volatile. And so when we take those both together, we can see kind of how the data is moving right now, and then how it's been moving over the longer term. And then there's a third component, which is kind of we call them spot prices. And so you see spot prices on things like gasoline or oil or markets, and that's kind of your real-time indicator of prices. And so this is why it gets complex, because you've got a year over year, you've got a month over month, and then you've got what's happening right now with a lot of those prices.
What is the concern about wages? Can you talk about that with us?
Yeah, so now we're adding another component, and this is where it really gets to how people feel about the economy. And when you talk to the average person right now, they don't feel great about the economy. But it's hard to pin exactly why they don't feel great. And it comes down to this number that you're talking about. And that is, we look at wage growth, and then there's real wage growth. And so the way you convert from nominal to real, now we're getting really nerdy economics, is real growth is inflation adjusted. So our nominal wage growth last month was 3.2%, slowed down from 3.3% the month before. But then we've got inflation at 3.4%. So our real wages contracted by 0.2% last month. So what happened? So what that means is that people's wages are not keeping up with the increase in prices. And so it gets harder and harder to be able to buy the same things. People are getting further behind, on their monthly bills or on their monthly expenses. because overall their wages are not keeping up with the increase in prices. So ideally what you want, and this is the Fed's target, they want inflation at around 2%, and then they want a nominal wage growth to be at about 3%. So then you've got 1% real wage growth. What we've got now is the exact opposite, where we've got prices increasing faster than inflation, and it's causing a lot of these problems.
So when you saw this report, kind of give us your basic take on it. What were you thinking? This is good. This is bad. This is eh.
Third option. It was eh. It wasn't really clear. We had somewhat slowing. So what's kind of fun is with this report is you can break it down. You can look at different components. So I broke it down. I looked at some of the big changes. On one side, a year ago, we're hearing all about egg prices, how egg prices were such a big problem. They were so high. Last month, egg prices dropped by 0.4%. So egg prices are not a problem anymore. However, on the other side, beef prices are the new hot item. They're up nearly 10%. On energy prices up 15% over the last year. Gas prices up 25% over the last year. But on the other side, you've got used car prices have dropped 2% over the last year. And healthcare is right around that rate of inflation, right around 2.7%. And then when you pull out goods and just look at services, that's kind of our underlying inflation. Service prices up 3%, housing prices up about 3.2%. So this is why you hear, there's not a lot of clear direction about what the Fed needs to do with this, because it's kind of all over the place. We've got some hot items, we've got some cool items, but overall that slight drop, makes this a little bit better than worse than we've seen in the past.
All right, and then finally, let's just chat about interest rates one more time. How do they factor into this, and where do we stand?
Yeah, so this data becomes critical to what the Federal Reserve is going to do. Their next meeting is in September. And, the Fed has what's called a dual mandate. They're mandated by Congress to focus on two things. And those two things are inflation and employment. And so this week has been a critical week. We got the inflation report yesterday. And then last Friday, we got the employment report. And what we saw was similar with the employment report, where it was slightly negative. I would say it was more negative than the inflation report. It showed that we contracted. We actually lost jobs last month by about 35,000. But at the same time, the unemployment rate dropped. So what we see is inflation getting a little bit better, employment getting a little bit worse. What that should do for the Fed and for markets is it should lessen the pressure on interest rates. So, it's not definitive that rates are going to come down, but there's less pressure for rates to go up. And so markets are kind of adjusting right now. They're figuring out what to do, figuring out how to price this in. But the upward pressure on interest rates is a little bit less than it was a week or two ago.
Okay, Robert Spendlove with Zions Bank, thank you so much for talking about all of it with us. We certainly appreciate you deciphering everything for us.
Good to be with you.